Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight we're travelling somewhere colder than Siberia, quieter than a morgue, and somehow even more terrifying than either. The icy corridors of Unit 731. Officially, it was the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Imperial Japanese Army. Unofficially, it was a butcher's lab dressed up as science. You're not a soldier. You're not even a spy. You're a prisoner of war, or just some unlucky peasant caught in the wrong village at the wrong time, shackled, catalogued, and shipped to a frozen corner of Manchuria to become part of a nightmare that history nearly forgot on purpose. Before we begin, a quick but important note. Tonight's story explores real historical events involving extreme human suffering, medical experimentation, and war crimes committed by Unit 731 during World War II. While presented in a calm, educational tone with dry humour, the content may be disturbing to some viewers. Listener discretion is advised, especially if you're sensitive to themes of torture, biological warfare, or crimes against humanity. Now, go ahead and like the video and subscribe, but only if calm, softly narrated, historically accurate horror stories are your idea of a good time. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always fun to see who's tuning in from around the world. Now close your eyes, take a slow breath, and try not to shiver. You're about to be very cold, very naked, and very thoroughly examined. You don't remember being arrested. Not clearly anyway. It wasn't cinematic. No uniformed men kicked down your door while a patriotic trumpet played in the background. There was no dramatic trial, no monologue, no defiance. Just cold hands, shouted orders, and the kind of silence that can only come from an entire town pretending they didn't hear anything. 1 minute you were at home, and the next you were being shoved into a wooden rail car that smelled like wet straw and piss. You are told you're being relocated. No one says where or why, and you don't ask, because asking implies that anyone here cares enough to lie. The train moves with the leisurely pace of something that knows you aren't going anywhere important. The wheels clatter in hypnotic rhythm, a lullaby composed entirely of dread and iron. There are no windows in your car, just narrow slits that let in enough light to remind you it's still daytime. The air is thick with bodies, warm, damp, breathing bodies pressed together like meat packed for transport. No one speaks, not out of respect or fear, but because there's nothing to say that hasn't already been said by the stench. Somewhere outside, the frost of Manchuria creeps across the ground in sheets of white, but inside it's sweat and steam, and the slow, aching awareness that you are not a person anymore. You are a number, a unit, a sample. You had a name once, but the guards never used it. And soon enough, you stop thinking it to yourself. Names are for people. You are cargo now, unlabelled, unprotected, and unmissed. Every so often, the train stops. Not at stations, but in the middle of nowhere. Someone screams. Someone is pulled off. Sometimes they come back, looking pale and smaller somehow. Sometimes they don't come back at all. No one explains. No one cries. Eventually, you learn not to watch. Because whatever happens out there is not your business. You haven't had business since the moment you were loaded onto this train, like a particularly stubborn sack of rice. There is no food. Water comes sporadically, ladled out in chipped tin cups by a man who smells like ash and doesn't look anyone in the eye. You drink fast, like a dog at a roadside puddle. Some of it dribbles down your chin, freezing almost immediately. Your breath fogs the air, and the air tastes like rust. You're not sure how long it's been. Hours? Days? Time is slippery here. It oozes past you without shape. You try to mark it by the sound of footsteps above the car, or the changes in light. But even those betray you eventually. It's all grey, inside and out. You think about jumping briefly, not to escape necessarily. You're not deluded enough to think there's a world beyond the frost where people live normal lives, sipping tea and reading newspapers, but just to be off the train, to end the movement, the not knowing. But the door is locked, bolted and watched, and your legs are too numb to stand anyway. So you sit, you wait, and you rot just a little more. At some point you realise the train isn't going in a straight line anymore. It lurches, turns, slows. There's shouting outside, but it's muffled. Then the doors open. Not all the way, just enough for daylight to crawl in like something ashamed of being seen. The guards bark orders in clipped Japanese. You don't speak the language, but you've heard it enough now to recognise the tone. March, move, shut up. The snow hits you like a slap. It burns before it numbs, like every bad decision you've ever made, rushing back to mock you. The ground is hard and unforgiving beneath your shoes, if you're lucky enough to still have both. Some around you are barefoot. One man limps on swollen stumps wrapped in dirty cloth. No one helps him. Helping implies you think he'll need his legs tomorrow. You follow the others across a barren expanse of white. Barbed wire glints in the distance, and smoke curls upward from squat brick buildings arranged in neat little rows. The place looks like a school or a factory, somewhere efficient and unremarkable. There's no sign, no flag, just cold concrete and order. The kind of place that doesn't feel evil exactly, just empty, like morality never lived here to begin with. You're herded through a checkpoint. Your clothes are taken, so are your belongings, if you had any left. A guard writes something in a ledger, and you watch as your name is replaced by a number. It's inked neatly, like everything here is supposed to be. No fanfare, no announcement, just a quiet subtraction. You are not prisoner 2417. You are 2417. The prisoner part is implied. There's a uniform. It doesn't fit. It doesn't matter. You wear it anyway, because the air is eating your skin, and you've already started to shake. The compound smells like bleach, smoke, and something faintly metallic that you can't quite place. You try not to imagine what it is. You're brought to a holding room, a long concrete cell with benches, drains in the floor, and a single bulb dangling from the ceiling like a bored god watching ants drown. Someone coughs, someone else vomits quietly into a corner. The guard doesn't react. You sit down because standing is no longer an option. And you close your eyes because you're not sure how much more you want to see. You are not afraid. Not exactly. Fear implies a future. You are empty. That's what they want, probably. Emptiness is easy to fill. With syringes, with scalpels, with questions you'll never be allowed to answer. You don't know it yet, but you've just arrived at Unit 731. The name means nothing to you now. It's just another number, another building, another place where people disappear into corridors and don't come back out. But later, much later, someone will say the name aloud in a documentary, or a declassified file, or a haunted whisper from a historian who doesn't sleep much. And when they do, your story, what's left of it, will flicker behind their eyes like a slide from a projector in a room that's far too cold. But for now, there's only the silence, and the snow, and the slow understanding that you're not going to be released, you're not going to be rescued, you're going to be studied, and you're going to be broken. Pingfang looks almost normal, at first glance anyway. It's quiet, precise, unassuming, a military compound folded neatly into the Manchurian frost, with orderly fences, smokestacks curling lazy spirals into the air, and soldiers in pristine uniforms who don't yell because they don't need to. The buildings are squat and symmetrical, painted a soft grey that seems designed to blur into the sky. You might think you've been brought to a barracks or a supply depot, something useful, if dull. The illusion is convincing enough, until you step past the outer gates. Inside, the air changes. It's colder somehow. Not the natural cold of winter, but the artificial chill of concrete that was never meant to be warm. There's a chemical tang to it too, a sting of disinfectant that clings to your throat and burns slightly behind your eyes. It smells like a hospital, not a healing one, but the kind of hospital where people go to die without ceremony. You've never been inside a slaughterhouse, but you imagine it might feel something like this. Sterile, echoing, and scrubbed just enough to hide the blood. You're led through corridors that seem to go on forever, each one bleaker than the last. The walls are lined with exposed pipes, condensation dripping steadily, like a leaky faucet in a prison cell. The floors are wet, not flooded, just perpetually damp in a way that makes you want to curl your feet under yourself and never touch the ground again. There are no windows, no signs, and no furniture except for occasional metal benches bolted to the walls. You try not to look too long at the drains in the floors. The guards don't speak to you. They don't need to. They walk ahead of you with that particular kind of military stiffness that says they are following orders they don't care to understand. Occasionally, you pass other men, not prisoners but staff. Some wear lab coats, others wear surgical masks, even though no one is operating. Most carry clipboards, one carries a bucket. None look at you directly, though one does pause briefly to examine your face the way you'd inspect a cracked bowl at a market stall. He says something in Japanese. You don't understand it, but it sounds like a comment about livestock. You're taken to a processing room, though no one calls it that. There's no sign on the door. Inside is a tile floor, too white to be trustworthy, and a large metal table in the centre. You're stripped again, your uniform taken and replaced with something even less dignified. A thin cotton gown that doesn't close properly in the back. A man with wire-rimmed glasses and a clipboard asks questions through an interpreter. Not about your well-being or your background, just your blood type, your weight, your age. It feels less like an interrogation and more like a grocery list being checked off. They take your temperature, your pulse. They examine your teeth, your fingernails, the state of your feet. They write everything down. You're not handcuffed because you don't need to be. Where would you go? You are behind 5 locked doors, flanked by men with rifles, surrounded by snow and silence. You are not being secured. You are being catalogued. Eventually, you're given a number, this time on a tag that hangs from your neck. It swings slightly as you walk, tapping your chest like a morbid metronome. You are not a prisoner. That word implies some kind of due process, some hope of release. No one here uses the word prisoner. Instead, they refer to you, when they refer to you at all, as maruta, the Japanese word for log, as in firewood, as in something to be stacked, stored, and burned when useful. You learn this later. At first, it sounds harmless, almost quaint. But once you understand what it means, you can't stop hearing it. Every time they say it, it feels like being sawed in half, slowly, without ever breaking the skin. You're shown to your quarters, a generous word for a concrete box with a drain, a straw mat, and a slit in the wall for food. The walls are stained in places, the colour of old rust, and the single light bulb overhead flickers when you breathe too loud. There is no bedding, no toilet, no schedule. Time here is a concept left intentionally vague. The guards come when they come. The food, when it arrives, is tasteless, lumpy, and cold. Sometimes it isn't food at all. Once you're given a thick grey paste that smells faintly of fish and chemicals. You eat it anyway. Outside your cell there is noise. Not all the time, just enough to keep you alert. Screams mostly. Sometimes muffled, sometimes sudden. Always short. Then silence again, as if the building itself swallowed the sound whole. Once you hear something that might be a child crying, followed by what sounds like metal instruments being arranged on a tray. Another time, you hear laughter. Not cruel, just clinical. The kind of laughter people use when they're explaining something complicated and mildly amusing. It echoes in your skull for hours. Eventually you begin to see the patterns, the same footsteps every morning, followed by the same metallic clang, the same cart rolling past your door, squeaking on one bad wheel. You begin to sense when something is about to happen, when someone is about to be taken. Sometimes it's you. Sometimes it's the man in the cell next door, whose name you never learned because neither of you were allowed to speak. No one tells you what Unit 731 is. They don't need to. The place explains itself. In the cleanliness, in the precision, in the way the staff take notes while you vomit from the injection they just gave you, watching like curious schoolboys waiting to see which part of the frog twitches next. There's a room where they weigh your waist, another where they draw blood until you pass out, then measure how long it takes you to wake up. One day, you're taken into a chamber with no windows and strapped into a chair with leather restraints. A man watches you through a glass panel, scribbling something as the room temperature begins to drop. You don't remember how long it lasted, just that afterward, your fingertips turned black. You are not being punished. That's the most important thing to understand. Punishment implies guilt, justice, law. None of that applies here. You are not guilty, you are not innocent, you are not anything. You are material, a sample, a variable in an experiment whose purpose is never explained and whose conclusion is never in doubt. You will suffer. They will learn, and no one will ask if it was worth it. Outside, the snow continues to fall in soft, silent waves. It covers the rooftops, the fences, the bloodstains on the ground. From above, Pingfang still looks like a normal military compound. Neat, quiet, professional. From the inside, it is a machine built to erase you with clinical efficiency. And it is working. You meet them one by one. Not in any formal sense. No introductions, no handshakes, no whispered warnings about what's to come. They appear in your life the way a needle appears in your arm. Sudden, sharp, and always with a smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. They wear white coats, some crisp, some stained, and their clipboards are never empty. They nod at you as if you're cooperating, as if you've agreed to this. They call you specimen or subject, sometimes just a number, never a name. The difference in their minds is administrative, not moral. They're not what you expected. No wild-eyed sadists, no ranting lunatics with bloody gloves and a god complex. They're calm, well-educated, and irritatingly polite. Many trained at top universities, Tokyo, Kyoto, even some in Europe. Some were celebrated surgeons before the war, men who once delivered babies and treated infections and removed gallstones with loving precision. Now they're here, dissecting the living and dosing the dying, and doing so with the same level of detached professionalism they probably once reserved for curing the flu. They do wear surgical masks sometimes, but not to protect themselves from disease. Disease is the whole point here. No, the masks are to help with the smell. You can tell because they only put them on when the procedures involve cutting open tissue that's already begun to rot. They have no fear of catching anything. They've built this place to be the source of contagion, not its victim. You, on the other hand, are the unlucky middleman, the flesh bridge between symptom and conclusion. The doctors don't shout, they don't threaten, they don't need to. Their power is absolute and bureaucratic, which is worse. Every movement they make is recorded. Every procedure is logged. There's a kind of elegance to the whole thing, like watching a mechanical clockwork tick away, each cog clicking neatly into place. They write in beautiful penmanship. Kanji characters curl like brushstrokes on smooth paper, detailing exactly how your lungs filled with fluid or how long your body trembled after exposure to certain toxins. It's poetry, just very clinical poetry about suffering. When they speak to each other, it's in low tones. Occasionally, they'll laugh, not cruelly, but academically, the way a professor might chuckle at a curious anomaly in a lab rat's behaviour. They never speak to you unless it's necessary. Even then, it's short. director, instructional. Breathe in, hold still, swallow this. You try to comply not because you think it will help, but because disobedience doesn't register here. Pain isn't a punishment, it's a data point. You can't resist your way out of the hypothesis. One of the younger doctors, a man who can't be older than 30, has a habit of humming when he works. Not a tune, just a note, low and steady, like the sound of a machine idling. He hums as he checks your temperature. He hums as he draws blood. He hums as he gently pushes your eyelid back, with a gloved thumb to shine a light into your pupil. You try not to think about what else he hums through. What other procedures require the same tune to steady his hand? They keep everything tidy, immaculate even. The tools are always sterilised, the floors are scrubbed. The walls, though grey and windowless, never seem dirty. Cleanliness is part of the illusion. The lie that what's happening here is medicine. That because the instruments are sharp and the notes are thorough, it must be science. And in a way it is. Science stripped of ethics. Discovery divorced from decency. It is progress, but only if you define progress as understanding how long it takes for a man's heart to stop beating when it's been removed from his chest without anaesthesia. Sometimes you wonder how they got here. Not logistically, that part's obvious. They were recruited, promoted, funded, but spiritually. How does a man go from saving lives to slicing them open for fun and funding? You imagine it didn't happen all at once. Maybe it began with small compromises. A test subject who wasn't quite dead yet. A virus injected just a little earlier than protocol allowed. A dissection that came before a death certificate. And eventually, the oaths and promises fell away like old skin, and what remained was a man with a title and a scalpel and no reason to stop. They talk about you in front of you. Not to insult you, you're not important enough for that, but as if you aren't there at all. You hear things like excellent reaction time, minimal resistance to pathogen, surprisingly intact intestines. One of them once complimented your bone density. You almost laughed, almost, but your mouth was wired shut at the time, and you were trying not to choke on your own blood. It would have been funny though, if any of this were funny. On rare occasions, one of them seems hesitant, not remorseful. That's too strong a word. But you catch glimpses, a pause before a procedure, averted eyes as you're strapped down, a signature written just a bit slower than the others. These moments pass quickly. They are professionals after all, and professionalism is a powerful sedative when morality starts knocking on the door. You hear rumours, passed in whispers through gritted teeth and bloodied lips. Some of these doctors were promised promotions, others were promised publication. A few were told they were saving lives, that their work would protect Japan from biological attack or help cure diseases for future generations. You don't know if they believed it. Maybe they still do. Maybe it's easier to think of yourself as a hero if the screams come with citations. Their records are meticulous. They document every death, every symptom, every reaction. They note how long you convulsed, how many hours you lasted without water, whether you sweated more or less than the others before your kidneys shut down. There is something perversely comforting about the attention to detail. You are suffering, yes, but at least someone is paying attention. You are not forgotten, just filed away. It's strange how the mind adjusts. After a while, the horror isn't in the procedures themselves, not the needles, not the incisions, not the infections. The horror is in the normalcy, the routine, the fact that the men doing this wear clean coats and soft-soled shoes and clip their pens to their lapels with the same care they once reserved for wedding photos or birth announcements. They are not monsters, they are men. And that somehow makes it worse, because monsters you can see coming. You don't know it's your turn until they come for you with gloves already on. That's how this place works. No announcements, no scheduling, no warning. Just the sound of boots in the hallway, a key in the door, and 2 orderlies who don't speak your language, but don't need to. You already know what the straps are for. They take you down a different corridor this time, colder and quieter than the others. The kind of quiet that doesn't happen naturally. It feels engineered, like the building itself is holding its breath. The walls are damp. You pass a room where something metallic clatters, followed by a noise that sounds like wet fabric being pulled apart. You don't look. You don't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing you try to guess what you're walking toward. The operating room, if you can even call it that, is blindingly white. Not comforting white, like a hospital. Clinical white, like they're trying to scrub away what's already happened in here hundreds of times before. The floor is tile, the drains are numerous. The table is metal, with thick leather straps at the wrists, ankles and forehead. You are not here for treatment. You are here for display. They don't knock you out. Of course they don't. That would defeat the purpose. Anesthetics dull the body's responses. They mask the pain, suppress the spasms, interrupt the signals your nervous system sends out in protest. And those signals are the point. They want to see your organs react in real time. Your pulse flutter as the incision spreads. Your breath quicken as clamps peel skin from muscle. Your muscles seize and release as they explore the landscape inside you. You're told to lie back, as if this is a dentist's chair and not an altar. You don't resist. You've stopped resisting days ago, maybe weeks. Time has melted into a shapeless smear, and you've learned that fighting only makes the straps tighter. One of the doctors wipes your chest with something that smells like alcohol and antiseptic. It's a kind gesture if you forget what it's for. Then the blade comes out. It's small, elegant, surgical, and very, very sharp. The first cut is shallow, exploratory, almost curious. A line just below your sternum, like they're tracing a roadmap to something important. You feel it all. Every nerve, every quiver, every involuntary twitch. It's not pain, not exactly. Pain is something you can respond to. This is more like electricity coursing through your bones, lighting up pathways you didn't know existed. Your back arches despite the straps. One of the assistants holds you down without looking at your face. They talk as they work, not to you, about you. Clean incision, minimal bleeding. Subject responding as expected. You want to scream, but your throat is too dry. All you manage is a sound, like air leaking from a cracked pipe. One of them jots a note on a clipboard, nods and asks for a retractor. The next moment, you feel your chest open slightly, the skin pulled apart with a wet, sucking noise that makes the room seem even quieter than before. There is no drape, no cloth to cover what shouldn't be seen. Your body is fully exposed, not just physically, but conceptually. You are no longer a human being. You are a demonstration, an opportunity to observe something usually hidden by skin and mercy. They peer inside you the way one might examine the engine of a rare car. They are not trying to hurt you. They are trying to understand you. That's what makes it worse. And they go for your liver first. It's large, warm, and easy to reach. You feel their fingers press against it, manipulating it gently, like someone testing the ripeness of fruit. One doctor taps it with a gloved knuckle and watches your reaction. You feel a sharp stab of nausea, followed by a spreading heat in your gut. They note the time. One of them mentions tissue consistency. Another remarks that your blood pressure is holding surprisingly steady. You want to tell them it's because your body hasn't caught up yet, that the panic hasn't finished setting in, but you're not allowed to speak. Above you, a pane of glass reflects your face. It's tilted slightly downward, just enough to catch your expression. You see your breath fog up against it in little clouds, one for each second you're still conscious. Your eyes are open, wide, and unfamiliar. Your skin looks pale and stretched, like wax left too long in the sun. You don't recognize yourself. That's probably the point. They continue, deeper, slower now. They move along the intestines, tracing the length of your digestive tract, with the patience of men admiring a painting. One lifts a portion of your small intestine, examines it under the light, and gently sets it back inside you. You feel every motion, not just the pain but the pressure, the unnatural sense of being touched where no one should ever touch. It's not like being stabbed. It's like being turned inside out. At some point, you black out. You don't remember doing it. There's no dramatic fade to black, no spinning room. Just a sudden absence, followed by the sound of your own breathing dragging you back. You wake up to the feeling of something being stitched. Not neatly, not carefully. Just enough to keep you functional. One of the doctors checks your pupils and shines a light in your eye. You flinch. He nods. Still responsive. You're not bandaged. They cover the wound with a loose strip of gauze and tape it into place, like a butcher wrapping leftovers. You are wheeled back to your cell on a metal gurney, each bump along the hallway floor, sending new ripples of agony through your ribs. No one speaks to you. No one tells you what they learned. No one tells you whether it will happen again. You lie on your mat for hours staring at the ceiling. Your stomach aches with a constant, low throb. Your arms shake. You feel every beat of your heart echo through the places they touched. You don't bleed much. They were careful about that. But you can't stop trembling. It's like your body is trying to escape itself from the inside. Later you hear them again. The doctors in the hall, talking about another subject, another liver, another experiment. You realise you were one in a series, not the first, not the last, and certainly not the most important. You try to remember what your liver looked like, in case it ever matters. But all you can picture is your breath on the glass, fading into nothing. They take you outside before dawn. The snow has already covered the walkways again, erasing every footprint, like the earth is trying to forget what it saw the day before. The wind bites at your face, with little teeth, not playful, not even angry, just indifferent. This part of Manchuria doesn't care about your suffering. It's been frozen longer than you've been alive, and it plans to stay that way. The guards don't bother explaining. You already know that explanations aren't part of the protocol. You're escorted to a low, windowless outbuilding that looks like a tool shed until you step inside. Then you see the pipes, the steel tables, and the buckets. The walls are lined with hooks. A few hold towels, a few don't. At the centre of the room are two large basins filled with water and blocks of ice, cloudy and rough-edged, like they were broken off a glacier and dumped there without ceremony. The water isn't just cold, it's a living thing. It moves with malice, it wants you. You're ordered to sit on a stool bolted to the floor. Your gown is rolled up past your elbows, and your arms are extended out over the basins. You hesitate for a second, not to resist, but because your instincts, what's left of them, still beg for warmth. A guard places a hand on the back of your neck. Not harshly, just firmly enough to remind you that you don't own your limbs anymore. Then your forearms are lowered into the water. The pain is instant. It's not even sharp at first, just pure white panic. Your muscles lock up, your chest tightens, your body forgets how to breathe. You want to scream, but your brain is too busy trying to figure out what just happened to the rest of you. Within seconds, your skin begins to burn. Not from heat, but from the cold eating away at your nerves. You think you're shivering, but then realise you can't feel your fingers anymore. They've already gone. A doctor walks in, checking his wristwatch. He says nothing, just writes down the time and nods for the next phase to begin. You're kept in that position for what feels like an hour, though it could be less, or more. Time in the ice doesn't behave the way it does in your cell. It stretches and snaps like brittle rubber. You watch the skin on your arms slowly lose its colour, pink, then white, then a strange waxy blue. Like candle flesh, your veins shrink. The muscles beneath twitch. You know, even before they tell you, that this part is only the beginning. When the doctor gives the signal, your arms are pulled from the water. You can't move them yourself. They feel alien now, heavy and stiff like prosthetics strapped on by mistake. Someone taps your forearm with a metal rod, and the sound it makes is hollow, like tapping a log. There's no response, no pain, no resistance. The skin is hard and smooth, the way meat looks when it's half frozen. They record your reaction, or your lack of one, and then the next test begins. You're led to another room, this one warmer, though still barely above freezing. There's a heat lamp mounted on a movable arm, and a basin of tepid water, not hot, not enough to comfort, just enough to stimulate thawing. Your frozen arms are submerged again, this time into warmth, and the pain returns like a tsunami. First it's pins and needles, then knives and fire, then something worse, a deep pulsing agony that feels like your bones are swelling from the inside, trying to shatter your skin and escape. You lurch forward, the guards hold you still, the doctor watches without blinking. You scream. This time it comes out. The room absorbs it politely. The walls don't echo. The guards don't flinch. The doctor writes something down. Your pulse rate, your vocalization. The colour of your skin as it tries to remember what circulation is. One of the assistants remarks that the left arm is reacting more strongly than the right. He seems pleased by this. You do not share his enthusiasm. They monitor your progress for hours. They don't care if the pain stops. They care when it stops. They take notes on the colour of your fingertips, how long it takes for blisters to form, how many nails turn black. They bend your fingers one by one, testing range of motion, noting which ones remain limp, which ones begin to crack, and which ones start to bleed. The bleeding, they explain, is good. It means something inside you is still alive enough to respond. By the end of the session, your arms are bandaged in thin gauze, more for appearances than function. The skin beneath is split and swollen. One hand doesn't move at all. You're told not to touch anything, though no one really thinks you could. Even if you could, you wouldn't want to. You've seen what happens when you do. One of the other prisoners, one who had been through this earlier, tried to adjust his sleeve the next day and tore off a strip of skin without realising it. He stared at the wound like it belonged to someone else. Back in your cell, the cold feels different now. Not sharp, not biting, just constant, like static. Your arms throb, your hands ache in a way that doesn't feel like pain anymore. Just information. They're telling you something over and over again. Something like, this is what you are now. Damaged goods, a partial specimen. The notes from your session will be compared to others. Results will be compiled. Charts will be drawn. You will be one of many frostbitten limbs in a sea of data that no one outside this building will ever be allowed to read. At some point, you fall asleep, more from exhaustion than comfort. When you wake, your hands are curled into claws you can't unclench. The skin is tight and glossy, and your fingertips feel distant. You can't tell if the sensation is pain or memory. Either way, it doesn't leave. You'll be called again in a few days, maybe for another Frostbite trial, maybe something else, maybe both. You try not to think about it. You try not to think at all, but the cold won't let you forget. It stays in your blood, in your breath, in the cracked, blistered skin of your forearms. You carry it with you now, proof that you were studied, proof that you were used, proof that someone, somewhere, wanted to know how much of you could die before you stopped being useful. You don't remember when the fevers started, maybe because they never really ended. Ever since you arrived, your body has been a testing ground, your bloodstream a suggestion box for someone else's research goals. And now you've entered the next phase, the disease experiments. You weren't told, of course, but you knew the moment they brought out the cages. Small wooden boxes, wrapped in mesh, buzzing faintly with life. Not rats, not birds, ticks, lots of them, hungry ones. There's no announcement, no explanation. Just a quiet exam room, a pair of gloves, and the vague whine of insects. The doctor, or technician, or whatever title they're giving themselves this week, gently straps the tick box to your bare thigh. You watch as they crawl across your skin, searching for a warm place to dig in. You try not to flinch, but the instinct is still there, buried beneath the numbness. Then the lid is secured, and you're told to sit still. Not that it matters. The ticks are already feeding. You are already infected. They like using ticks. They're efficient, discreet, and harder to trace. More natural, in a way. You're told through a muttered translation from another prisoner that today's test involves bubonic plague, the same one from medieval Europe. Rats, boils, Black Death, that whole drama. Only this time, it's not spread by chance. It's hand-delivered. Grown in petri dishes, cultivated with care, and introduced into your bloodstream with surgical precision. The symptoms start slow. First a headache, then joint pain, then a kind of heaviness in your limbs, like gravity is conspiring to pull you into the floor. By the time the swelling begins, first in your groin, then under your arms, you've already been moved to a separate cell. Observation unit, they call it. It's the same as your old cell, except now the food slot is used for thermometers, urine samples, and occasional photography. You're being documented, not helped, not treated, just recorded. You lie on a thin mat, soaked in sweat. Your sheets, if they were ever clean to begin with, are now damp, crumpled, and stuck to your back like second skin. Breathing hurts. So does moving. So does being still. Your lymph nodes balloon into painful knots under your skin, hot and tender, like overripe fruit. You cough blood into a tin bowl and watch it congeal. A nurse retrieves it an hour later without comment. You're not the first one. You won't be the last. Eventually, someone comes in with a clipboard and a syringe. Not for treatment, of course, for the next round. This time it's cholera. They want to see what happens when you're infected with multiple diseases at once. Synergistic effects, they say. Co-infection. It sounds like a business merger. The syringe goes into your arm, and your stomach starts gurgling before they've even pulled the needle out. The diarrhea hits like a flood. There's no warning, no pause, just an immediate loss of control. Your body empties itself over and over until there's nothing left to give. You cry without meaning to. Not from pain, you're well past that, but from the sheer humiliation of becoming a leaking vessel, a collapsing thing that once stood upright and spoke and remembered its own name. Now you're a host, a petri dish with a pulse. They leave you like that for days, maybe longer. Time stops meaning anything when your insides are boiling. You hallucinate. Faces in the corners, shadows where there are none. At one point, you're convinced your cell is sinking, being swallowed whole by the earth, and you almost welcome it. Better to drown than to keep waking up to the sound of your own body falling apart in slow motion. When they return, it's not to clean you, it's to check your vitals. A pulse, respiration rate, pupil dilation. They swab your mouth, your wounds, your waist. They weigh what came out of you, write it down, smile faintly, as if pleased by the consistency. You try to speak, not to ask for help, but to beg for silence, for rest, for death maybe, but your throat is cracked and dry. Your voice just a rasp that sounds like paper tearing. They nod and leave. At some point, you hear the word syphilis. You don't remember when they gave it to you. You didn't feel the needle this time. Maybe it was in your water. Maybe from one of the needles they reused without sterilizing. Either way, it's in you now, worming its way through your nervous system, laying its quiet little eggs of madness. You know what happens next. The books you read before this place described it well enough. Tremors, memory loss, lesions, and finally, insanity. You're not there yet, but the road ahead is clearly marked. There is no treatment here. That would defeat the purpose. The entire goal is to observe the stages, how long it takes, what the immune system does. When the mind begins to fray, you're just another data point in a long list of people whose suffering has been turned into statistics, charts, graphs, useful conclusions. The worst part isn't the sickness itself, it's the waiting, the endless silent anticipation of the next dose, the next insect, the next experiment. They don't tell you what you're being given anymore. Sometimes it's anthrax, sometimes typhus. Once it's a lungful of mist sprayed directly into your cell, followed by 2 men in masks scribbling on clipboards, while you cough yourself inside out. You beg without speaking. You pray without knowing what to pray for. Eventually, you stop reacting. Not because it hurts less, it doesn't, but because your body is too tired to bother. You don't flinch at the needle. You don't blink at the blood. You just breathe when you can, sleep when you're allowed, and wait for the next pathogen to introduce itself. You are a disease map now, a walking catalogue of human frailty. Your body has been turned into an encyclopedia of symptoms. Your veins a filing cabinet full of failed immune responses. Somewhere, a doctor is building a portfolio off your collapse. Maybe one day, he'll publish a paper. Maybe it'll help someone. Maybe it won't. But by then, you'll be gone. And your name won't be on it. Because you were never the subject. You were just the setting. You're not surprised when the screaming changes. You've grown used to the sounds of suffering here. The sharp gasp of cold water, the rasp of blood-soaked coughing, the muffled thud of a body collapsing in the next cell. But lately, there's something else in the air. Not louder, but different. Softer in a way that's harder to ignore. A kind of crying that feels more human, more helpless. And eventually, you realise what it is. It's the sound of women. Women who weren't supposed to be here. They're kept in a separate wing mostly. You only see glimpses, figures being shuffled down hallways, with their heads lowered and their arms bound in front of swollen bellies. Sometimes you hear them at night, whispering or weeping through the cracks in the walls. The guards treat them differently. Not kindly, just carefully. Like expensive equipment that can't be replaced. They are not prisoners, they are vessels, and what they carry is more valuable than they are. You don't know where they came from. Some are Chinese, some Russian. A few look Japanese, which confuses you more than anything. All of them are young. Not girls, but not yet old enough to be safe from notice. You hear rumours in passing that some were captured with the resistance fighters, others taken from rural villages, promised food, safety, a job. All lies, of course. They weren't chosen for who they were. They were chosen for what they could do. You learn, slowly, and with a kind of exhausted horror, what their purpose is. The doctors want to study vertical transmission, how diseases pass from mother to fetus. It's a clinical phrase, almost sterile. But what it means in practice is unspeakable. These women are deliberately infected during pregnancy, some in their first trimester, others much later. Bubonic plague, syphilis, typhus, gonorrhea. The point is to observe what happens, how the body copes, what passes through the placenta, how much the unborn child can endure before it becomes a statistic. They keep detailed records. Of course they do. The pregnancies are timed with military precision. Hormones are tracked. Weight is measured. Blood is drawn weekly, sometimes daily. When the time comes, the births are rarely natural. There's no need for it. No point. Caesarean sections are performed not in operating rooms, but in procedure chambers, under bright lights, with no anaesthetic, and with multiple observers taking notes. The goal isn't to save the mother or the child. The goal is to extract the subject intact and at the right stage of infection. Some of the fetuses survive the procedure. Briefly. Long enough to be weighed, examined, dissected. The mothers often don't survive at all, whether from blood loss, infection, or simply because they're no longer needed. They are discarded. Their names are never recorded. Their bodies are cremated. Their absence is noted only by the sudden silence in their cells. You hear one woman scream for almost 30 minutes straight before falling silent mid-breath. No one checks on her. No one mentions it afterward. Another time, you catch a glimpse of a girl being led down the hall, barely able to walk. Her belly is huge, but her face is hollow. She's clutching a blood-stained cloth between her legs. You look away before the guard notices you looking. The babies, if you can call them that, are treated no differently than samples, labelled, bagged, sometimes preserved in jars suspended in cloudy fluid with little paper tags tied around their feet. You once saw a tray of them being carried past your cell. You thought they were dolls at first. Then you saw the movement, a twitch in the fingers, a slow blink, then nothing. The doctors speak openly about the data. They compare the effects of syphilis versus gonorrhea on fetal brain development. They debate whether cholera results in more miscarriages than anthrax. They seem particularly fascinated by co-infections, how multiple diseases might interact when introduced during gestation. It's science, they say. Necessary work? They believe this, or they pretend to. By now, you've stopped trying to tell the difference. Sometimes the women are made to nurse the infants, at least briefly. Not out of care, but curiosity. Will an infected mother transmit more disease through breast milk? How long does it take for a newborn to show symptoms? When does the crying stop? They track these things with the same diligence they use for every other test. There is no sentiment, just data. One night, you hear a lullaby, software wavering, sung in a language you don't recognize. It drifts through the walls like smoke, curling through the cracks and settling into the floor of your cell. For a moment, it almost sounds human, almost tender. Then it stops abruptly, as though someone was reminded that music is not part of the protocol. You ask yourself whether this is worse than what's been done to you. You can't decide. Comparing agonies feels pointless now. Your suffering was physical, targeted, efficient. Theirs is slower, more intimate. Their bodies used not just for decay, but for creation, and then destruction. It feels colder, but that might just be the air in your cell again. You begin to dream of them. Not as individuals, you never learned their names, but as shadows. Ghosts with rounded bellies and silent mouths. They walk the hallways in your sleep, trailing blood and lullabies, reaching out with arms that never held what they carried. You wake up sweating, but not screaming. Screaming takes energy, and you've long since run out. Eventually, the program thins out. Fewer women pass your door. Fewer cries echo down the halls. You hear a rumour that the doctors are shifting focus, moving on to a new series of experiments involving frostbite and gas exposure. The women have served their purpose. Their notes have been collected. Their usefulness has expired. You will not see them again, but you will remember. Not because you want to, but because some things carve themselves so deeply into your mind that forgetting becomes impossible. And somewhere in those memories, between the whispered lullabies and the rustle of paper tags tied to tiny ankles, something breaks. Not just in them, in you. You've always assumed the body has limits, that there are things it simply can't survive, thresholds it won't cross, not without shutting down or giving up. Unit 731 is eager to test that theory, not to protect anyone, not to improve anything, just to find out. Where does the body break? Where do the organs fail? How far can a person be pushed before they stop being a person and start becoming a number on a report? They call it environmental testing, a sterile term for something that feels anything but. You're not dropped into a desert or shoved into a snowdrift. You're brought into a series of specially constructed rooms, blank, concrete, silent. Everything here is built to simulate one specific aspect of death, and to do it in repeatable conditions. This isn't torture for pleasure. This is torture for science. You are not being punished, you are being studied. The pressure chamber is the first one. It looks like a steel drum laid on its side, with a single window in the door, and a thick valve that hisses when it seals. They strip you down to your underclothes and tell you to sit inside. No instructions, no warnings, just the sound of the door closing, followed by a metallic clunk as the locking bolts twist into place. Then the pressure starts to change. At first it's subtle, your ears pop, Your chest tightens slightly. You've felt this before, on a plane maybe, nothing terrifying yet, but then it keeps going. Your lungs begin to burn, your head feels too full, like your brain is being inflated. Blood vessels burst in your nose, your ears, your eyes. The walls of the chamber seem to bend, though you know it's just your vision distorting. Your joints ache like they've been filled with gravel, and then the real pain begins. Your bowels twist, your skin stretches, you feel something inside you tear. You try to scream, but the air refuses to behave. It escapes in a gasp you don't remember making, and your body doubles over involuntarily. A high-pitched ringing drowns out everything else. You black out, or maybe you just stop being able to separate sensation from thought. Eventually, the pressure returns to normal. The door opens. You're dragged out by your arms. One of your eardrums is ruptured. They note it on a clipboard. You're not given time to recover. Recovery is not the point. This isn't about adaptation, it's about limits. How much pressure until hemorrhaging begins? How long before unconsciousness? What does a lung look like after collapse due to rapid decompression? These are questions with answers now. You helped provide them. Later, you're led into another room. This one smells faintly of copper and something sharper, almost acidic. You're chained to a chair bolted to the floor. There's no mask, no protection, just you and a vent on the far wall. When the gas is released, it comes silently. You don't see it at first, then your eyes start to water. Your throat seizes and your skin burns like it's been coated in boiling oil. Mustard gas. That's what they say later, though at the time, you think you've simply caught fire from the inside out. Your lungs refuse to cooperate. Each breath is a knife. Blisters erupt on your arms, your face inside your mouth. You can't move, can't escape. You're a static experiment in chemical warfare, and the people behind the glass are tracking your decline, second by second. How long until blindness? How long until organ failure? They don't stop the gas. It simply runs out. If you survive, so not everyone does, like you're left with skin that peels in sheets, lips that split when you blink too hard, and a rasping cough that never quite goes away. You become one of the gas subjects. You're categorized, compared, labeled with terms like moderate exposure or severe dermal reaction. You wonder if they're planning to test you again, or if your reaction was too useful to risk repeating. Then comes cyanide, or maybe it's phosgene. They rarely tell you in advance, and by now you know it doesn't really matter. Gas is gas. What changes is how it kills you. Whether it strangles your cells or sears your lungs, or convinces your nervous system to shut off entirely. The sensation is different every time, but the process is always the same. You're sealed in, exposed, observed, and if you're unlucky enough to survive, recorded for later. The fire tests are rarer, but you hear about them. Some prisoners are tied to stakes and exposed to controlled bursts of flame. Not enough to incinerate, just enough to char. Others are locked in rooms that are slowly heated to unbearable temperatures. You don't know what the threshold is. You only know that sometimes the rooms come back empty, and sometimes they don't open at all. The ones who scream are replaced quickly. The ones who go quiet are kept longer. Quietness is measurable, predictable. You learn this through observation, because no one tells you anything directly. Information is doled out like rations, too little to nourish, just enough to keep you aware of the system's size and indifference. One day, a prisoner down the hall doesn't return. You hear later, through the cautious murmur of someone who overheard a technician, that he died during a high-altitude simulation. His lungs expanded too quickly. There was a tearing sound, then blood from the mouth, then nothing. The doctors were pleased. Apparently, the data was clean. A good threshold point. You begin to wonder what they'll try next. Drowning? Radiation? Electricity? The building seems to contain endless rooms, each one tailored to a particular kind of failure. And each failure tells them something. Not about you, but about the human body, in general. You're not a person here. You are an average, a margin of error, a piece of evidence in a larger puzzle you'll never see the full shape of. Eventually, your own body begins to betray you, not from the experiments themselves, but from the constant cycle of fear, exposure, and neglect. Your skin doesn't heal, your joints ache, your hair thins. You lose track of which symptoms came from which tests. The distinction is meaningless now. Everything you are is infected by plague, by cold, by chemicals, by knowledge you never asked for and can never forget. You think for a moment about the scientists, about how they present this research, carefully, proudly. They believe they're making history, that their work will outlive you, outlive the war, outlive even the horror. They're right, in a way. It will outlive you, but you will die knowing that it was never about survival. It was only ever about thresholds. They stop pretending you're here for any reason but attrition. There's no medical veneer this time, no clipboard consultations or gentle-sounding diagnoses. You've served your purpose as a test subject in the lab, as a specimen in the observation ward. Now you've become something else, a number in an endurance study, a human trial run for the mechanics of suffering. How long can a body last with nothing but pain and protocol? It starts with food, or the absence of it. They don't announce a fast. They simply stop sliding meals through the slot. The first day, you assume it's a mistake. The second day, you hope it's a delay. By the third, you understand. This is the experiment. They want to see what you'll do when the pangs of hunger stop being sharp and start becoming background noise. When your body starts to burn what little fat you have left. Then your muscle, then whatever dignity you've managed to retain. They do let you drink, just enough to survive. Water is rationed in metal cups, warm and metallic tasting, slid across the floor like a favour. You're never sure when it'll come, or how much you'll get. You learn to sip slowly, not because you're savouring it, but because if you finish too quickly, and the next delivery is late, the thirst will feel worse than the hunger ever did. Sometimes they add salt to the water. You don't know if it's intentional, it doesn't matter. The result is the same. When they decide you're weak enough, the marching begins. You're pulled from your cell, stripped of whatever rags you'd managed to layer for warmth, and sent out into the yard. It's a walled-off patch of frostbitten dirt, surrounded by watchtowers and floodlights, as if the enemy might appear from the snowbanks at any moment. You're ordered to walk in a circle, not fast, not far, just endlessly. No coats, no shoes, no rest. Every few laps, someone shouts an order. Change direction, speed up, slow down. It's not to train you, it's to confuse you, to wear you down in mind and body until your legs give out and your brain stops resisting. When you fall, they let you stay down for a while. Sometimes minutes, sometimes hours. They make notes on clipboards. Eventually, you're dragged back inside and locked up again. Not because the test is over, but because they want to see how long it takes you to recover without food or medical care. You lie on the concrete, shivering, trying to stretch the skin over your aching bones. Every muscle in your legs pulses with pain. Your toes are swollen, cracked and blue. You curl inward. It doesn't help. A few days later, or maybe the next day, it's impossible to tell anymore. You're taken out again. This time to a different part of the compound. A long dirt trench dug into the frozen ground, with several wooden posts driven in at intervals. You're tied to one. Arms bound behind you, legs spread just enough to make standing painful. You're left there in the cold. Hours pass. Then something new happens. There's a distant thump, followed by a rush of air and a sharp crack. You feel something sting your thigh, not a bullet, not that kind of impact, but something else. A burn, a puncture, a spread of warmth that turns almost immediately to nausea. You've just been hit by a shell. Not the kind meant to kill outright. This one was ceramic, filled with bacteria, and fired specifically to see how well disease can be delivered in combat conditions. Later, You'll hear whispers about these tests, about how the Japanese military is developing biological shells, weapons meant to infect enemy populations, not just eliminate them. You're part of the trial. Your role is to get sick, preferably quickly, and with traceable symptoms. They'll be back to check the wound, to measure the swelling, to see how long it takes the infection to spread through your bloodstream. You try to move, but your muscles have locked from cold and exhaustion. You vomit on the post, and they leave you tied there anyway. This is not punishment. That's important to remember. Punishment implies you've done something wrong. There's no morality here, no behaviour to correct. This isn't about justice. This is procedure. You are a constant in an equation. The doctors are interested in timelines, in dosages, in contagion radius. They've already tested this shell on dogs, on pigs, maybe on prisoners who didn't live long enough to be tied upright. You're the next iteration, an upgrade, or maybe just another data point. You're eventually returned to your cell. You can't walk, so they drag you. Your skin scrapes along the ground, and the wound in your thigh oozes a dark, foul-smelling liquid. It soaks into the thin cotton of your gown. No one treats it. They want to observe it. The fever comes quickly. Your pulse races. You hallucinate. You sweat so heavily that you feel like you're dissolving. Someone checks on you twice a day. Not to help, just to document. They write down the colour of your skin, the depth of your breathing, the sounds you make when you try to speak. When the fever finally breaks, you're still alive. Somehow, your thigh is infected but not gangrenous. They bandage it, roughly, without cleaning it first, and leave you alone again. You hear two doctors arguing in the hallway. One thinks the results were inconclusive. The other thinks they should try the same shell again, this time at closer range. Neither of them cares that you can hear them. You are not a person, you are a variable. The next test involves cold again, not frostbite, but exposure. You're left outside overnight, no shelter, no shoes, just your body, curled against the base of the wall, trying to conserve heat that isn't there. You try to stay awake because you've seen what happens to those who fall asleep out here. They don't always wake up. Your lips crack, your breath slows. You count the seconds in your head, but eventually you lose track. There's only dark and cold and a low, steady hum of pain that doesn't fade, just sinks deeper. Eventually, they haul you back in. They measure your core temperature, record your muscle rigidity, photograph your hands. They are pleased. You are still alive and therefore still useful. You're allowed one bowl of gruel. It tastes like mold and boiled cloth. You eat it anyway. You no longer think about escape, not because you've accepted your fate, but because the idea has become absurd. Escape implies there's something to escape to. Somewhere warm, somewhere clean, somewhere where people don't inject you with plague and make you walk in circles until you bleed from the soles of your feet. That world feels fictional now, the stuff of old stories. Here, the rules are different. Here, resistance is not punished. It's recorded. You thought no one knew. That was the only thing that made the silence bearable. The idea that the world outside was ignorant, innocent, shielded from this frozen compound and its charnel laboratories by distance, war, and plausible deniability. You imagined the people you once knew carrying on their lives, unaware. Governments fighting battles, soldiers marching, civilians rebuilding cities. All of them too busy, too distracted to know what was happening behind the locked gates of Pingfang. But you were wrong. They knew. Not everything, perhaps. Not the full horror, not the fetuses in jars or the frostbitten limbs stacked like firewood, but enough. Enough to know something was happening. Enough to know the euphemisms didn't add up. Epidemic prevention and water purification department was always a mouthful, and never convincing. You're not sure what kind of department burns its medical waste at night and sends out supply requests for plague cultures by the gallon. There were whispers in Tokyo, in Nanjing, in Moscow. Even Washington had its rumours. The American intelligence agencies knew about Japanese human experiments as early as 1942. There were reports, eyewitness accounts, documents intercepted, scribbled in code, and tucked into diplomatic pouches. They weren't detailed. They didn't need to be. The right people knew just enough to make themselves uncomfortable. And so they did what powerful people have always done when faced with inconvenient truths. They filed it away. You, of course, didn't hear any of this. You were too busy trying to keep your lungs from collapsing or your intestines from leaking out the incision that never healed. Your world had shrunk to the size of a single cell, a single chair, a single scalpel. The silence in your cell wasn't just absence, it was engineered. The guards never spoke. The doctors never explained. The only thing louder than the screaming was the paperwork, constant, endless paperwork, ensuring that nothing about you would be remembered, unless it served a purpose. But outside these walls, men in suits debated what to do with knowledge they wished they didn't have. American POWs had gone missing near Manchuria. Soviet spies had noted the presence of quarantine zones near Harbin. Chinese families had begged for answers about vanished loved ones. Journalists had heard rumours from retreating troops, from defectors, from half-mad survivors who described things too grotesque to print. And still, nothing was done. Because no one wanted to be the first to admit that medicine had been turned into a weapon. That doctors, trained, licensed, respected doctors, were slicing open the living not to save lives, but to record how long it took for death to arrive. In the end, secrecy wasn't maintained through ignorance, it was maintained through indifference, and through paperwork. So much paperwork, the Japanese military understood bureaucracy. They weaponized it. Every prisoner was documented. Every experiment was labelled with a date, a case number, a neatly written hypothesis. When you were injected with cholera, it went into a ledger. When your frostbitten fingers were amputated and then grafted onto another prisoner to see what would happen, it was written in beautiful penmanship on government-issued forms. They used fountain pens, they underlined the important bits. These records were never hidden. Not really, just buried. In drawers, in offices, in boxes marked confidential. And after the war, when those offices were emptied and the drawers were forced open, people found them. Not just the Soviets, who had their own ideas about how to use what they uncovered, but the Americans too. The same people who bombed Japan into surrender sent envoys to Harbin to investigate what the Imperial Army had left behind. They were horrified, but not in the way you hoped. They didn't weep over the photos. They didn't mourn the bodies. They asked for copies of the research. They asked for the names of the doctors. They asked for access. Because you see, what had been done here, to you, to everyone you ever heard screaming through the walls, was valuable. The diseases you carried, the gas that blistered your lungs, the pressure that burst your eardrums, those were data points now. Unethical, yes. Unspeakable, maybe. But useful. And usefulness has a way of making people forget what words like unspeakable are supposed to mean. So the files were taken, the doctors were protected, Unit 731 scientists, many of them war criminals by any sane definition, were given immunity in exchange for their findings. They went home. Not to prison cells or gallows, but to university posts, to boardrooms, to sanitized labs in Tokyo and Osaka, where they continued their work in peacetime. This time, under different names and new funding. You were never acknowledged. In the records, you were marked deceased. Or worse, unidentified. Your death was backdated, often to a time before the most gruesome experiments even began. To keep the timeline tidy. Officially, you no longer existed. But of course you did. Bruised, coughing, waiting. They just needed you to be dead on paper, so they wouldn't have to deal with you in person. If your family asked questions, they were told you died in the chaos of war. Maybe of disease, maybe of enemy fire. The fog of conflict is good at hiding bodies, better still at hiding intentions. and the world moved on. The Americans got their intelligence. The Soviets held their trial, a limited, largely performative proceeding in Khabarovsk, where a few confessions were squeezed out and then quietly filed away. No one was executed. No one served real time. Japan rebuilt. The West focused on the crimes of Germany, where the villains wore swastikas and gave perfect sound bites for the Nuremberg cameras. But no such spotlight found Harbin. Unit 731 faded into textbooks, the darker ones, the fringe ones. It became a footnote, a cautionary tale, a detail omitted from the broader narrative of Allied victory. You were never rescued because there was no plan to rescue you. You were never avenged because there was too much paperwork involved. The lie of secrecy was never about keeping the world from knowing. It was about making sure the world didn't care. August 1945. The war ends, not with fanfare, not with sirens, just a change in rhythm. The guards walk faster. The doctors stop asking questions. The building holds its breath. Something's shifted, not inside your cell, but beyond it. Like a rope has snapped in some distant sky, and no one wants to admit the weight is falling. You feel it in the little things first. Your food tray doesn't come. The nurse who usually wipes the blood from your cot doesn't appear. The halls are louder with footsteps, but quieter with words. Conversations become clipped, orders are barked, clipboards vanish. Everyone moves, like they're packing up a theatre before the police arrive. Then the rumours arrive, in shivers and whispers. Japan is losing. Then Japan has lost. Then the Emperor himself has spoken, breaking the divine silence to admit surrender. A god brought low by 2 bombs. Hiroshima, Nagasaki. You hear the names like myths, too big to imagine, too final to grasp. You think for a brief, fragile second that it means something for you, that the gates might open, that the walls might fall, that someone, anyone, might be coming. But the only thing that comes is smoke. The incinerators start up again, not for heat, for evidence. Files are hauled out in carts, medical logs, transport rosters, supply orders, all of it fed to the flames. You don't need to see it. You can smell it. Burnt paper, singed leather, the faint acrid bite of melting film. There were photos, you think. Photos of you. They're ash now. The guards don't meet your eyes anymore. They pass your cell with the expression of men checking off a chore they wish they hadn't been assigned. They don't yell. They don't strike. They just count. Tally. Sort. It's clean up now, not command. The scientists leave next, one by one. The young ones are first, loaded into trucks in the early hours, their faces blank, their arms full of documents. The older men linger, not out of guilt, but to pack more carefully. They wear officer uniforms, civilian coats. One of them walks past your cell with a metal case tucked under his arm and a cigarette between his lips. He used to hum while dissecting you. Now he doesn't even glance in your direction. And still, no one comes for you. You wonder if you've been forgotten. If, amid the chaos, your name has finally fallen off the clipboard. If you might simply starve, quietly, anonymously. You imagine dying alone, untouched, unrecorded. It's the most peaceful option you've been offered in months. But that's not how it ends. They remember. Not all at once, not with ceremony, but methodically, efficiently. The guards begin removing the rest of the prisoners, one wing at a time, not for transport, for disposal. They're not documenting now, just finishing. There are no screams, no last-minute mercy, just coughing, then silence, then a smell, sharp, sweet, wrong. You know what it means? Gas, injections, rooms sealed and left to empty themselves. And then they come to your door, they open it, glance inside. One of them has a notebook, though he doesn't write anything down. Maybe it's for show, maybe the script says, check cell, confirm status, move on. You expect to be dragged out, but instead they turn, leave the door open and walk away. You don't trust it, you don't move, Your legs wouldn't carry you anyway. You lie on your mat, waiting for a second visit. A final sweep. A correction. None comes. The hours stretch, then the day, then more. The silence grows teeth. No food, no water, no footsteps, no keys. The building feels hollow, like a tomb that finally knows it's a tomb. You wonder if anyone else is left, if the coughs in the distance are echoes or memories, if you are the last. And then, one morning, or night, it's impossible to tell, you hear new sounds. Boots, louder, heavier, not rushed, not routine, a different language, not Japanese, Russian, maybe. You catch shouting, metal clanging, a door breaking. The compound is being cracked open like an egg. Not to save you, but to take inventory. Eventually, they reach your corridor. A man stops outside your cell. You hear a muttered curse. The door creaks open. You blink up at him. He doesn't know what he's looking at. He sees bone, infection, a face half melted by starvation and fever, a record not meant to survive. You see pity briefly, or maybe just confusion. They wrap you in a blanket, photograph you, take samples, tag you like evidence. You're moved, not cruelly, not kindly, like cargo. They think they've rescued you, but they're too late. You're not a prisoner anymore. You're a leftover. You think someone will pay for what was done to you? That the war, now finished and counted in treaties and headlines, will shift its attention to the unspoken. That someone, maybe in a courtroom, maybe behind a tribunal's desk, will finally say your name aloud, that it will echo, that it will matter. You imagine a judge staring down one of the doctors who opened your abdomen with the curiosity of a butcher and asking slowly, deliberately, why? But no one does, not in the way you hoped. The Soviets are the first to act. Their soldiers sweep through Pingfang, boots heavy on the tile, masks tight over their faces. They find the wreckage, the vats of preserved organs, the tanks of anthrax cultures, the shattered instruments scattered on concrete floors. They find what's left of the cells, and sometimes what's still in them. There are bodies charred, stacked, half mummified from the frost. There are survivors too, though survivor is a generous word. Most are incoherent. Some can't speak at all. A few manage to whisper. There's a trial, eventually. Khabarovsk, December 1949. 12 former members of Unit 731 are put in the dock. There are confessions, long, specific, bureaucratically horrifying. The men admit to vivisections without anesthesia, to deliberate infections with cholera and plague, to dissecting pregnant women just to see how far along the disease had spread. The transcripts stretch for pages. You'd think the world would stop and read every word. But it doesn't. The verdicts are predictable. Guilty, but not excessively so. The sentences are short. Some of the convicted are quietly released after a few years. A few are folded into Soviet medical research programs, shielded by the same hunger for data that once led them to inject diseases into your veins. Because that's what it comes down to, data. And that's where the Americans come in. They arrive not with warrants or moral outrage, but with briefcases. Their interest isn't justice, it's information. They know what happened here. Their intelligence agencies had been piecing it together since the early 1940s. Intercepted documents, odd reports, whispers from prisoners of war who had seen too much and lived to talk about it. They don't need confirmation. They need access. So they make a deal. In exchange for full disclosure, for the research logs, the Frostbite charts, the gas exposure trials, the notes scribbled during live dissections, the lead scientists of Unit 731 are granted immunity. No arrests, no extradition, no press conferences. Some are allowed to quietly resume their medical careers. Others are moved into new positions, often with government backing. One of them becomes a prominent public health official. Another receives a medal for his service to science. Their pasts are redacted, rewritten, or simply ignored. Your name is not in any of the files they care about. You're not mentioned in the transaction. If your death was ever recorded at all, it's likely been backdated, moved to a convenient time before the worst of it began, so no one has to account for what they did to you afterward. A simple stroke of the pen makes you disappear from the timeline. If your family asked what happened, they were told you died of disease. Or during combat. Something vague, something war-shaped, something that doesn't raise questions. There is no Nuremberg for you. No rows of doctors in the dock. No grainy black and white footage replayed on newsreels. No tearful witnesses. The spotlight never turns this far east. It never lands on Harbin. There are no stern pronouncements from judges in robes, no last words translated into 5 languages. Only silence and paperwork, and the quiet shuffling of history moving on. Because the world had the facts, and it made a choice. A cold, deliberate, pragmatic choice. It chose to forget. Forget not because it didn't know, but because it did. And knowing meant responsibility. Knowing meant trials, headlines, uncomfortable comparisons to the horrors of Europe that the Allies had so publicly condemned. Knowing meant admitting that some of the worst crimes of the century weren't just committed by the defeated, but quietly absorbed by the victorious. So instead, they filed it all away, in archives, in basements, in libraries that no one visited. The documents were catalogued, but never displayed. The photos were studied, but never shown. You were turned into a citation, a case study, a paragraph in an obscure medical journal, stripped of name, context, or outrage. The doctors lived out their days in peace. Some died surrounded by grandchildren. Others received pensions. A few even gave interviews, though they never talked about you. Not really. They talked about scientific necessity, about data gaps, about sacrifice. They used words that made the crimes sound clinical, clean, as if ethics could be boiled off in an autoclave. No monuments were built, no reparations paid, no apologies issued. You became a footnote, an asterisk, a regrettable incident in the long and triumphal march of medical advancement. And still, you hoped, maybe not for revenge, not anymore, just for someone somewhere to speak plainly, to say it was wrong, to say it happened, to say your name even once. But history is not in the business of remembering the inconvenient. It buries them and calls it closure. They tried to make sure no one remembered you. That was the point. The files were burned. The doctors were protected. The survivors were silenced, disbelieved, or buried in footnotes. You were erased from the ledger. Officially, you no longer existed. Your name, if it ever made it onto a form, was quietly crossed out. Not because you died, but because it was easier to pretend you had. You were never meant to have a story. Only symptoms, only data, only numbers scribbled in columns no one was supposed to read again. But stories have a way of crawling back. Sometimes someone finds a photograph, blurred, mislabeled, forgotten in a file. Sometimes a student stumbles across a name like Unit 731 and follows it down a long dark hallway of footnotes and half-erased horrors. Sometimes, like now, someone listens. And for just a moment, you're not lost. You're not a subject, not a statistic, not the average survival time under decompression. You're the man who tried to breathe when his lungs collapsed, the woman who carried a child infected before it ever drew breath, the prisoner who survived frostbite, then gas, then starvation, only to be forgotten by the people who said they'd never forget. Maybe it's not justice, but it's something. A breath, a whisper, a name spoken softly in the dark, even if no one knows how to spell it anymore. You don't get a monument, you don't get a grave, but you get this. For 1 hour, in the quiet between sleep and memory, someone hears you, and you are real.